Burns Hargis, president of Oklahoma State University, and today we're here interviewing, doing what we call an oral history with General Al Goodbary. General Goodbary comes from a long line of OSU folks. His parents were W. Allan and Doris Goodbary, who finished their time here on Earth in Kearney, Oklahoma. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and they were graduated from here in 1941.
41.
And Henry Bellmon, whom we're going to talk about today, is graduated in 42. So they were roughly
the
same generation.
Exactly.
Were they friends? Do you
I'm not aware of them being friends then.
Yeah.
But shortly thereafter, or later on in their careers, they became very close friends.
Your parents were one of 5 couples that were selected by President Henry Bennett to start the agricultural portion of the .4 program, which we call USAID today.
That's correct, sir.
I think most people may know that President Bennett was named the head of the .4 program by President Harry Truman at its formation in the late 40s.
Right, it's the fourth point of his foreign aid or foreign or
I always thought it may refer to the 4 points of the compass, but instead it was the 4th thing he talked about.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Al Goodbary, though. Describe your background for us.
Well, sure. My folks made it very simple for me to come to OSU. They said that I could go anywhere I wanted, but the checks were coming to Stillwater. And I came here in 1960. I went in the Army for 2 years in 65 and came out 31 years later.
What did you major in here at OSU?
I majored in accounting and auditing.
But you were obviously an ROTC.
ROTC cadet, and I guess you could call it a minor in military history, or a minor in military science.
Right. And then, take us through some of the highlights of that 31-year career in the military.
Well, we had I started off in the Airborne Division, which was always exciting for a young lieutenant, and
jumping out of airplanes.
Jumping out of airplanes, perfectly good ones, and. At that time, Vietnam was just getting started, so I found myself in 2 consecutive tours of Vietnam. And
what were you doing in Vietnam?
I was an advisor to the Vietnamese the first tour, and then came back and went to flight school to fly helicopters, only because at that time it was part of infantry. Mm-hmm. And then the second tour, I was an aviator in Vietnam.
So you flew helicopters?
Yes, sir.
I see. Any close calls during that period?
I think every day is a close call in combat in helicopters.
Right. And then where'd you spend the bulk of the rest of your time?
I think the bulk of the time, you could almost say, in between various short tours around the country, I spent off and on 15 years in Washington, D.C. area, off and on.
Yeah.
So the bulk of it, you could say, Washington, D.C.
So were you? You really spent your branch was infantry.
It was infantry, and then later we had to designate a secondary, so personnel management. So I went to our personnel center in Washington, D.C. for 2 tours, and then spent 3 tours in the Pentagon, and 1 as a White House fellow with FEMA, and then National War College while I was there. So we had multiple tours, multiple assignments there while in Washington, D.C.
Yeah. How? What was your highest rank?
The highest rank, I guess you could say, was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, which would be about a 3-star equivalent.
I see.
But I was only promoted to 2-star in the military rank system.
Yeah. When were you promoted to 2-star general?
It would have been in 1992 or 3.
And how long were you? I guess you first promoted as a 1-star
1-star
brigadier.
Stayed there for 3 years, and then went to 2-star and stayed there for at least 3 years. I had to stay 3 to retire to 2-star.
Right, and then you did retire, and what happened?
I retired in 1996, and then obviously you start looking for your post-retirement position.
Next chapter,
Next chapter, and fortunately, it came about as having come back to Oklahoma the year before and made a speech down at OU on distance learning and those kind of things. And someone from OSU was there, and I asked if I were going to retire soon. I said I had no idea at that time. They said, well, when you get ready, give us a call. And in fact, I did that. And lo and behold, the job was still available. And I came back and went to work in the Vice President for Research Office on government contracts.
I see. So your wife is Shirley.
Shirley, met her in school here
Here, and when were you married?
in 1962.
I see.
Still remember that date.
Yeah, yeah, as best you do,
Yeah, it is.
especially the day and month. The year
Exactly.
may not be quite as critical.
But let's try 2 June.
Yeah, yeah, good. And any children?
I had two boys and 6 grandchildren.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Any of them go to OSU?
Both of our kids went to OSU. In fact, we have now 18 graduates in our
Wow.
extended family
Wow.
who are OSU graduates.
When you retired, were your parents still in Kearney?
They were in good health, and we fortunately got to enjoy 7 or 8 good years with them before they passed on.
They were remarkable people. They traveled all over the world, didn't
They did, and it's an education that none of us can ever
they?
replace.
Did they stay with the .4 program or USAID all those
They
years?
did. When he retired, he was actually serving in Africa at the time in 1973 when he retired.
I see. Well, I can recall being at their home and the wonderful array of artifacts and,
Almost like a
and
museum.
souvenirs and acquisitions they've made around the world.
Indeed, and in fact, a lot of those went to, divided amongst the 6 kids. They had
Yeah.
6 kids, by the way.
Yeah. How? What were they doing primarily in these countries? What was the real function?
His real function was in the agricultural bit, having majored in animal husbandry here at Oklahoma A&M. And he was, in later years, as he became more senior, he was on the ambassador's country team as the food and agriculture officer or deputy food and agriculture officer for the ambassador.
I see. As I said at the outset, we could do a whole oral history on your folks.
I think we could.
And probably should. But one thing, I know that you were dear friends, as were your parents, with Governor Senator Henry Bellmon. And what's your first memory of meeting Henry Bellmon?
I think the first real memory was when I first came here. Now, I had not met him before I retired, but I'd always voted for him by absentee ballot when I was in the Army.
Why was that?
Because my parents ensured I knew all about him.
Yeah. So how did they become friends?
Well, they became friends when my dad retired in 1973. Of course, while he was with the government, he could not be in the political world very much. But once he retired from the federal government, it was very clear to him that he wanted to make sure that his party, your party, my party, continued well, and so he
You're talking about the
Republican Party, and that was just happened to be Henry Bellmon's party, and they wanted to make sure that he was successful in anything that he did or anything that he ran for. So they became very close friends.
Because he was a U.S. Senator by then.
Yes.
Yeah. But going back, Henry Bellmon was, of course, in the legislature when he came home from the war in the 40s.
Right.
But then he was defeated after his very first term and ended up becoming chairman of the Republican Party in the late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he had somehow run into Barry Goldwater, gone to and I can remember doing an oral history with Henry here, and he talked about going out and learning about how you organize a state for a party, and he did that for the Republican Party. But then he couldn't find anybody to run for governor because he seemed
Right.
absolutely hopeless, and he did it.
Right, and
Well, that's about the time you were graduating from college.
That's correct.
Yes, you
I graduated in '65. Yeah, I think
or that you were going to college.
going
I
to
should
college,
say.
right?
Yeah, yeah. So did you first meet him later in?
I really first physically met him really when I retired in '96.
Really? And
Yeah.
what was that occasion?
Well, that occasion that he had an office upstairs on the second floor here, And he also,
Second floor Whitehurst?
Whitehurst, and he was working for the vice president for research as well. And I moved into that office, shared this same suite, and we shared in the same executive assistant, and that great lady stayed with us for a long, long time until we both left. But nonetheless,
What did you, of course, he was a legislator, he was a chairman, he was a governor, he was a two-term senator, he was director of DHS, he was head of the Cowboy Hall of Fame. I mean, he had just a countless number of titles. What'd you call him?
I always called him governor because that's what he wanted to be called, or farmer, but I didn't think farmer sounded that so good. So
Farmer Bellmon, huh?
So he wanted to be, I always called him governor, and unless we were in Washington, D.C. together, and it was senator.
Well, a funny thing that Lamar Alexander told me, the senator from Tennessee, who was an aide to Howard Baker, and he was a young guy right out of school, and he had gone to a Republican Senate caucus meeting, and the various senators kept calling this guy governor. And, well, what do you think, governor? And so on. So on the way back to the Russell office building, Alexander asked Baker, well, what was a governor doing in the Senate caucus meeting? And Baker said, well, Lamar, that's Senator Bellmon from Oklahoma. And he said, well, why would you be calling him governor? And he said, young man, once you've been a governor, you don't want to be called anything else.
And that's what Governor Bellmon always said too. Yeah, he said, well, why would I want to be anything else?
Yeah. I always thought the whole time he was in the Senate, he'd just soon be back here on the farm in Oklahoma.
Well, every time we went to a public event or someone we'd go around the room and introduce ourselves. He'd always introduce himself as Henry Bellmon, farmer.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Right. Did you ever work in his campaigns?
I did not, but my parents did.
Yeah. Your dad had that big paper mache elephant.
Indeed.
Which he loaned to me when I ran for governor.
He took it to everything he could.
That's great. Well, what are some of your memories about working with Henry? I mean, what was your just talk about the man, the personality, and so on.
Every day that I had the privilege to work with him was a history lesson, in some way, shape, or form. Non-pretentious, wonderfully honest, always candid. You never had a doubt where he stood on any issue whatsoever.
I can remember during one of his campaigns, I can't remember what the issue was, but it was something we were worried about, and we were going to get negative press, and 4 or 5 of us sitting around with him and saying, well, we could say this, and somebody said, well, we could say that. Well, how about we spin it this way? And finally Bellmon said, well, let's not immediately rule out the truth.
Exactly. And that's what I mean by you always got the truth from him.
Yeah. So is that when he was a senator, did you, I guess you didn't have any direct dealings with him?
No direct dealings,
but
just
you were in Washington.
I was in Washington.
And was he considered a friend of the military?
He was. He was always considered a friend of the military.
Of course, he'd run the Silver Star as a Marine.
Right, but you never necessarily took his vote for granted.
Yeah. No, you could never take his votes for granted.
Right. And as it was seen in Panama, vote and all that.
I've seen him in a lot of things like that. We'll share a few memorable moments with him.
Oh, there's so many. Let's see. Since we did do a lot together, we did it both at the federal level and the state level. We spent a lot of time on the highway here in Oklahoma, and a lot of airtime actually going to and from Washington. He certainly knew where every chicken fried steak place there was.
And Mexican food. He was pretty good at Mexican food.
And so we never missed an opportunity to stop at those places. While we were always en route, there was always a history lesson in some way, shape, or form. Either his dealings with the alcohol guys when liquor was starting to get legal in Oklahoma, and how he dealt with some of the bribe attempts that he had. I mean, it's just a wonderful lesson in history and ethics, I think, more than anything else. He had, every once in a while, he'd like to drive. Not often, but occasionally. We wore suits, or at least I did at that time, and you normally try to wear a pretty clean one each day, but sometimes when he wanted to drive, you get in his truck, and you kind of have to ask him, where in the world has he been with it? You know, the windows do roll up, don't they? He said, oh yeah, but you know, it would be muddy, it would be dusty, it would be gritty and dirty. Or he got a new truck one day, and we went out there to get in it, and it was just bent to heck. I said, well, Governor, this truck's only a week or two old. I said, what in the world have you done? He said, well, one of my cows got loose, and I had to chase it through the trees.
In the pickup?
In the pickup. And so here's this brand new Dodge pickup, just beat to heck.
That's, well, you know, during this time, his second term as governor,
Yes.
which began 86 to 1990, and then he chose not to run for re-election. He couldn't run for re-election in the 60s.
Right.
The law did not permit it. Apparently, somebody, had you asked the legislature for money to fund economic development? I think Bellmon had done that.
Bellmon had done that, and
like 170 million for economic development program.
and I think it was to place these various economic development nodes around the state.
Yeah.
And
President Halligan, I guess, emphasized that this was not an OSU initiative.
right, and it wasn't. In fact, later on, we went back and met with Governor Keating, and Governor Bellmon at that time said, you know, I think it's time for me to review some of the things I maybe approved and put in place. And Governor Keating said, well, that may be a good idea. And the idea was to go back, and if it didn't make any sense, we'd report back, and maybe he'd kill it. Because Governor Bellmon saw some of these things, as far as he could see, they weren't doing a lot of ROI, a lot of return on investment.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember exactly why we never got to that. It may have been, you know, it could have been things like 9/11 and some of the things that ensued afterwards. I don't remember, but we did not do that. But he wanted so much to go back and review some of the educational programs as well as some of the economic development programs that he'd put together.
Was that done?
To my knowledge, no. We did not do it, even though we had gone and asked permission to move forward on it. And it may have been a switch in funding levels. I just can't remember why we didn't pursue it, but we didn't.
I see. You know, my wife, when I was a regent here, my wife, talking about Bellmon being here on campus, his then wife, Eloise, was saying that Henry was leaving real early in the morning because he didn't have a parking place here. And so my wife called me and just chewed me out about it. How in the world, because she was in love with Henry Bellmon.
We fixed that.
Yeah, she called me and she said, that's outrageous that he has to fight for a parking place up there. He always would drive up here real early in the morning.
That's true.
So he'd have a parking. Because for Henry, getting up early wasn't any chore.
Right, he could have just done some more in the field before he came in.
Well, yeah, my memory of working for him is if he sat down and it was quiet for 2 minutes, he was sound asleep.
He was sound asleep, but many people mistook that as his not paying attention.
Yeah.
Because he could come out of that, what we thought was a slumber, and ask a pointed question, it would just zing you.
Yeah.
And people would come to me later and say, you know, I thought he was asleep. I said, that was your first mistake.
He told me the story of going to church on a snowy morning, and there were only about 5 people in the church, and the minister got up there and talked for an hour on his sermon, and when it was all over, he came up to Bellmon. He said, Governor, did you not like my sermon? I noticed you slept through the whole thing. And he said, well, it was too long. He said, "You think it's too long?" He said, "Yeah, it was too long. I mean, when I go out to feed the cows and only 3 calves show up, I don't give them the whole bale."
But that's classic, that was
Yeah.
classic Bellmon.
Right. So you got him a parking place.
We did get
Okay.
the parking. I say
Good.
it got done.
Yeah. Now, did you work when you were here and working with him? Did you all do any work in Washington and trying to garner Department of Defense grants?
We
or
did.
other relationships?
We were up there quite a bit, in fact, and we would meet. And this is what was so powerful with him, because he knew and was accepted on both sides of the aisle. So it was not unusual for us to sit down with a Democratic senator and a Republican senator on the same trip, asking support for the same project.
And this was support for OSU or for the state of Oklahoma?
Mostly for OSU at that time.
What would be an example of some of them?
Well, example would be the start of what you now may remember as the asset program, but it started off as a CAT program and that was one of his dreams. How can I use excess talent in Oklahoma that went belly up during the oil bust? And how can I take those talented machinists and people that know how to build things and make parts for aging systems?
Mm-hmm.
And so we put together a program that was funded. It's still being funded.
Right.
I don't necessarily agree that it should still be funded. I think maybe that eventually should be on its own, but nonetheless, it's still being funded under a different name.
It's called the asset program.
Called the asset program.
That's aging aircraft.
Aging systems sustainment, and it's the aging systems sustainment enabling technologies.
And it's designed to match machinists and the like to produce parts for airplanes, primarily
Aging systems,
tinker,
right? Primarily tinker.
that have long since gone out of production.
That are original equipment manufacturers.
That's
correct.
Right.
And so there's a lot of support for that, and it's changed its focus a little bit over the years, but it never changed the fact that we wanted to use Oklahoma manufacturers, small businesses, to build those parts.
Yeah.
And he was avid supporter for that.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because he's no longer governor. He's no longer senator.
Right.
Certainly didn't need to work. He had the farm up there.
Had plenty to do.
Had plenty to do, and yet he still had this passion for helping Oklahoma.
He had passion for Oklahoma, he had passion for its people, and he had passions for Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And those things, when you put that in one person, boy, you got a powerful force. And so we would we'd go up there 3 or 4 times a year minimum, and just walk the halls for 2 or 3 days and come home.
Yeah, he and I went up there in, it had been probably in 87 or 8, and met there in the Roosevelt Room in the White House with Bush and Elder Bush, and their the Secretary of HEW, Secretary of HEW, on an idea for Oklahoma to change its Medicaid plan to more of an HMO, and he could. He got that appointment, no problem.
It's amazing.
People really respected his independence. I think he could make you madder than a hornet sometimes,
But
you didn't bother him.
Didn't bother him. And that continued too. Even later, we wanted to go down and brief OSU's ethanol program to Bush 44. 43.
Yeah.
And so it was just, he said, well, that's no problem. I'll just call Joe. Well, it's Joe Allen, who started out as Bellmon's driver.
I hired him.
Right, exactly. So we were, next thing we know.
Of course, Joe, just for the world history, Joe Albaugh then got into campaign management, and he was brought in late in the campaign of George W. Bush's campaign for governor against Ann Richards. And at the time, he was looking pretty sorry. And George W. Bush had campaigned. And Joe came in and basically managed that campaign to victory. And then he managed his campaign for president in 2000 and managed the Florida recount.
Right.
And the like, and then became FEMA director at the time 9/11 occurred. So he is, and who is also an OSU grad, I might add.
Oh, I know.
Joe Alban.
In fact, we met with him frequently on other things too. And in fact, Joe was at one of the Governor Bellmon's birthday parties up on the farm here, I guess 2 or 3 years before he passed away.
Yeah, I was there.
Oh, that's right, you were there. You and Ann were both there.
In fact, I lost a camera that day. I've never have found that
Is
camera.
that right? Maybe the girls have it.
Yeah, good. I don't know. I've asked them. So, did you ever see him mad?
Oh, I've seen him mad, but it was, I knew he was mad. I don't think it was a case where most people would have interpreted it as they were getting a real browbeating, but you could tell by it, he'd get a little bit red, and you could tell he was mad.
What made him mad?
I guess the things that would make him the maddest would be people that he was so disciplined in respect for authority, but not overbearing authority. In other words, if someone said they would do something, or someone asked them to do something and they agreed to, and they didn't do it, that would just really get him off on a tangent. Because that's someone's word and their bond not holding true. That would get him about as mad as anything.
He didn't. He was a religious man, wasn't he?
Well, he had, I think, deep faith, but he didn't wear it. And I think that's, I always respected him for that. He didn't, you knew that he had attended church most of the time, but you also knew that when he didn't, for some reason, it didn't upset him because his faith was strong, and you don't have to go to the house or the building or listen to that 1 hour preacher, to get the point.
You mentioned that party is up at the farm. What was it called? Twin Rocks?
Turtle Rock or
Turtle Rock, yeah, Turtle Rock.
It is Turtle
I
Rock.
think what he called it. There were people lots of people who had been with Henry Bellmon for 30, 40 years. I mean,
Exactly.
what do you think engendered the kind of loyalty that he seemed to receive from so many people?
Well, I think from the way he treated people, he treated them not as he just treated them as an equal human being. And I think people felt comfortable with him. They respected him for his position, but they also respected him for looking at them just as an individual.
But he really was not, I mean, he wasn't a particularly affectionate kind of person.
No.
He didn't...
He didn't go around hugging. And,
No. It
was just nice.
Didn't have a lot of the qualities that... he's pretty serious. I mean, he didn't a lot of small talk with Henry.
Not a lot, although we've sure had some fun times when he's come to our house for dinner in Edmond. I mean,
yeah.
He's come there many times, or came there many times, and he was, every once in a while, he'd even be at the blunt of a good birthday joke or something, and he'd get into a good laugh and a good...
Yeah, he didn't drink at all. In fact, when he was in the governor's mansion, they'd serve sparkling wine or sparkling grape juice or something like that.
Yeah, he would say, give me a little bit of red, but he'd never touch it.
No, in fact, but apparently Eloise toward the end got him taking maybe a glass of wine.
I think Eloise did get him to take a little bit more towards the end.
Yeah, but he certainly was not a drinker.
No, he was not.
In any and I can't remember. I don't remember him cussing much. I don't.
No,
every now and then you might hear a damn, but that was pretty much.
But I think that's he would say, and I have a lot of people that I say a lot of some of that I feel like the same way. He would say that most people who cuss all the time just don't know how to say it right.
Mm-hmm.
And why do that?
Right, right.
Now, every once in a while, as you say, for emphasis that when he's really mad, you might hear it then.
I don't recall very many people that he had much animus for. He was somewhat like Will Rogers when he said, "I never met a man he didn't like." But there were men he didn't like.
Oh, there were.
And one of them was Ted Kennedy.
You better believe it.
I'm sure he would have, I think he was gone by the time Ted Kennedy got sick, and I'm sure he would have had empathy for his family anyway, but he didn't have much use for Ted Kennedy.
No, he did not at all. I can't remember, there are a couple others that he spoke about, but I can't even remember who those are, but you're right, there are very few.
Very few.
Even his most vicious opponents at the Oklahoma Capitol, he would go and sit down in their office, and I'd be with him frequently, and you knew they were just diametrically opposed to every issue.
Yeah.
And it was always a friendly chat back and forth.
You know, he seemed to have a quality that we don't have much of in Congress today, and that was he was able to find a middle ground that was, you know, an outside critic would just kind of simply call it compromise, but he really could seem to be able to find sometimes a middle ground that made everybody reasonably satisfied. Maybe not happy, but
not happy, but they understood it,
satisfied.
and they were satisfied. Is right. That's a good description.
He would, I think, he would look at some of the things going on today and just feel like, you know, you're never going to get everything you want, and what you got to do is have it. You know, 330 gets you in the Hall of Fame in baseball. Batting 330. So if you get a third of what you want, you might have done okay.
A good friend who we've seen recently, Simpson, very good friend of Bellmon. They also, you know, they're very similar in nature and on compromise.
You're talking about the senator from Wyoming.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they were very close. So we'd meet with him occasionally when we go to
Allan Simpson.
Allan Simpson.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Well, when the history's written on Henry Bellmon, what do you hope it'll include?
Well, I hope that history. I would hope the history, and it may not just because of his lack of celebrity status, but I would like to see him put in the same level as a Will Rogers, as someone that everybody liked, nobody disliked him. Because I don't think anybody really truly disliked him for the same qualities that you just mentioned. So I would like to think that he'd be known as, I don't know whether it's the right term, but you know, we use the term populist, and that's someone that kind of goes down the middle. But he just did what was right. I think he voted his conscience to do what was right for people at the time. History, and he would always say, history will tell you whether I was right or wrong.
Yeah. Well, I know he didn't read polls. He wasn't very interested in
care
polls.
less.
And yeah, he was going to do what he thought was right. And he always felt like if you don't do that, then what do you need with representatives?
Exactly.
Everybody just cast a vote on every bill, and that's what it'll be. You don't need to spend all this money on chambers and all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people send me up there to use my judgment to do the best for my district in the country as I can.
And people trust, and then hopefully they would trust him to do that.
You certainly couldn't buy him.
No way. In fact, he talks about the time that someone came in with what was reported to be $25,000 in cash in a bag. That was this liquor thing. They wanted to buy and make sure they bought his support as governor. And he said, "Hey, you're talking to the wrong person. You're in the wrong room."
Yeah.
They laughed. They couldn't believe it.
Now, was he around at all when the University Multispectral Lab was conceived?
No.
He would have
He
been
was alive, but not.
Yeah, around here.
Yes, but he was not here.
Yeah, he would have been very interested in.
He always was. In fact, he would always call me. He'd say, "Are you going to be in Ponca? Or are you going to be where we can meet halfway for lunch?" And so we would try to do that. If I was going to be at Ponca for one day or something, we'd come back through Stillwater. We'd always meet at Cherokee Strip barbecue. That's his favorite haunt. And so he was interested in the UML, and we try to keep him up to date until the very last.
Mm-hmm.
So he was proud of that, though.
Well, that's great. I think I've kind of covered this because this contemplated that a lot of these questions filled out was around for his campaigns and
Yeah,
and all that.
I was not,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Right.
You know, there's one other thing he was real proud of, and it may be part of history. You remember the Oklahoma Alliance for Public Policy Research?
Mhm.
He did that as a governor, and he wanted to say, you know, and his point was, there's not one single university in this state that's big enough to do things on their own. But if you put them all together, and that time he considered three, OU, OSU, and OU Health Sciences. I was at Tulsa, with 3 research universities. And so he formed that, and he kept that as a 501c3. And when I came on board in '96, he said, I want you to help me run that, even as the next governor. And so we brought in OU Health Sciences Center as the 4th research university to bring all 4 research arms of this state into one alliance for public policy research. And the things they tried to do, they were very successful. They just didn't do it very much.
Hmm.
But
What were some of the things they tried?
one of the thing that I remember the latest, and it was a prison study. And they all went and they got their collective expertise out of the universities and put together a very nice prison study that I think dealt with incarceration lengths of time,
Right.
those kind of things. But his vision for it was to do a lot more. And you just had a hard time getting it through the bureaucracies,
Mhm.
particularly down south.
Well, on that note.
It was difficult.
On that note, we'll wrap this up, but Al, thank you very much.
My
You've
pleasure.
had a great history with Oklahoma State University, you and your family, and also with one of the great Oklahomans of all time.
Well,
Henry Bellmon.
I agree, and fortunately for me, my history continues,
Well, you're-
even in retirement.
Indeed. Well, you were nice to allow us to interview you for posterity, and we appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
President. Thanks.